Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 573 of the Juicebox Podcast. On today's show, I'll be speaking to the mother of two adopted children, one of whom has type 1 diabetes. Abby's on the show specifically now in November because not only is it Diabetes Awareness Month, but it's National Adoption Awareness Month as well. And I'm adopted too. So, I don't know why that matters. Sorry, I just threw that in. Now I'm feeling stupid for saying it. Let me go to something else. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Please always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. Speaking of Diabetes Awareness Month, I'm still trying to get as many people as I can to sign up and take the T1D Exchange survey at t1dexchange.org/juicebox. It was my goal to put 1,000 people on the survey this month, and we're off to a pretty good start, but I definitely need more, so I hope you can help. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. You have to be type 1 or the caregiver of a type 1 and be a U.S. citizen. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Omnipod, makers of the Omnipod Dash and the Omnipod Promise. Find out right now if you're eligible to get a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod Dash at omnipod.com/juicebox. Later, I'll tell you more about that free trial and explain what the Omnipod Promise is. Today's podcast is also sponsored by Dexcom, makers of the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. You could head there right now to their website, dexcom.com/juicebox, to find out more about the Dexcom G6 or to get started. Wear the same CGM that Arden's been wearing forever at dexcom.com/juicebox.
I'm Abby. My family and I live in the Nashville, Tennessee area. You will pick up a Southern accent as we are talking. It sneaks out every now and then. Married for almost 18 years. My husband is a firefighter, so that has an interesting dynamic. We have two kiddos. My oldest is 8.5, and he is our type 1. And our youngest also has special needs, a different sort of special needs. She is 7. Wow. So that's my crew.
And just so we know, like right out the gate, both the kids are adopted.
Yes, they're both internationally adopted. My oldest, Shay, is our son. He came home when he was 1. We actually got him on the morning of his first birthday.
Oh, wow. He
is Taiwanese, native Taiwanese. And then our youngest came home at 3.5, and she is from China.
No kidding.
That's us.
Can I ask you what made you adopt?
Oh, yeah, that's like a whole separate podcast.
Don't worry. We'll make it all part of this one.
Yeah, no. So my husband and I had been married for about 10 years. We knew that we wanted children. We also were in alignment that wasn't happening the natural biological way. And we did not want to have any type of interventions to make that happen. Mm-hmm. And so my heart was drawn toward adoption really early on. He has his own story, but he would tell you that he had to wrestle with some pride around, well, this isn't like the way I thought we were going to start a family, and kind of struggled with some maybe ego, even if he was being honest, of this isn't what I expected. But obviously came around, and we were in agreement that was what we were going to do to start a family. And yeah, we started down the path of
Can we
adoption.
Pick through that for a second?
Sure.
So you don't have to obviously share anything you don't want to share, but is it hard not to feel like it's your fault when you can't conceive?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, we did go through diagnostic testing, and so we did have answers. I will say this. I think there's something unique in, as a female, people automatically assume there's something broken in you as the woman, in terms of like, this is what a female is supposed to be able to do. And I think, there was a season of life where I felt sort of broken in that, and that things weren't functioning as they should be. And if I'm also very honest, this is part of my story. this sounds probably kind of strange, but up until that point in my life, if I had wanted something to go a certain way of my life, like it had happened, where I went to college, I got my first choice. Like when I graduated, like what job I wanted. And things just sort of always fell into place for me. So just from a personal, honestly, it shifted my faith pretty substantially in terms of, I'm actually not in charge of any of this. And I'm not in control, and my life isn't going to just be plotted out the way that I think it's going to go. And so, but there was a grieving process in that of, this was supposed to be something that was easy, and it's not for us.
How old were you when you started trying?
We got married what we now know was very young. We didn't think we were young. We were 23 and 24. And so I was just out of grad school. And so when we started trying, so I was, 28, I guess.
After you started trying, how long before you thought this isn't going to happen?
So the doctor won't even talk to you about that conversation until you've tried for a year. So for a year, we were sort of in like no man's land of like, okay, is something wrong? Is something like, are we just slow in this process? Like what's happening? And so at the 1 year mark, when it hadn't happened, is when we started some diagnostic testing just to get some answers so that we knew what was going on and then could make decisions from there. About
the time you find yourself under the bed with a wrench tightening up all the bolts. Yeah, you're like, I don't know what's going on, but the bed's falling apart and no one's pregnant. At the point where you start thinking like, no, I don't want to have sex again.
Trust me, it becomes a job at that point where you're just like, it was, looking back, it was a very challenging season of life. And that's to put it mildly. Of course, on this side of it, totally worth all of the difficulty and the frustration and all of that. I often say the way that I know that part of my life is healed, and that story is because I would not go back and write that story any differently if I could. And for a long time, I didn't believe that was possible.
So if I give you a magic wand and I say, I can make your fertility no trouble, but you lose the kids you have and you make your own babies, you wouldn't do that?
Never. Right. Not for absolutely any reason would I ever. This is what was meant to be for us.
Can I ask you, as an adopted person myself, how do you talk to your children about them being adopted? Because, first my question is even though I imagine physically they look much different than you, does that really, what age does the kid even start noticing that? Yeah,
it's interesting because, that happens differently, honestly, for each kid. And we do have the unique situation where, our children aren't domestically adopted. They're not Caucasian.
Right.
So obviously, we don't physically have the same characteristics, but we did have to go through a lot of kind of parenting prep, to become parents on this path, which I'm deeply grateful for. You could be resentful and like, why do I have to do all this? But in reality, what you are taught and trained, it's really, really important. So you learn, how do you have these conversations with your children? When is the age that you start having conversation? And so the biggest thing for us is that our children would never, ever remember having a conversation about, they would never be able to go back and be like, I remember the day I was told that I was adopted.
I don't have that memory either.
Yeah. And so that's an indicator of success. And so
I'll tell my mom.
We just named, we gave, especially our oldest, we gave him language very, very early on of, who birth mom, birth father, birth family. We had, books that normalized that families all look different. It just was a normal conversation. And so and we still to this day read a lot of books that help both of them understand, it's okay. We talk about having both and feelings. You can feel both happy that this is where you are, and at the same time, deeply sad that you're not in your family of origin, that you don't know who they are.
Right.
We can hold space for both of those things. I'm not saying we do this well, all the time, but we try to be very intentional about making space for whatever feelings that they have. Our son is very emotionally mature for an 8.5-year-old boy.
Okay.
Very in tune with how other people feel, how he's feeling. Our youngest one, because of her medical conditions, processes things a little bit differently. So she's a little bit blissfully unaware, even though we've had conversations. But they're very different between the two of them.
So did you, obviously, well, not obviously. So your son didn't have type 1 when you got him?
Correct.
Okay. Did you, but going for your second, were you purposefully looking to help a child with special needs?
No, not intentionally. So we felt very strongly that, a lot of people don't know this. When you adopt, part of the paperwork, especially for international adoption, is you have a medical questionnaire that you fill out of what types of medical conditions am I comfortable parenting. And this is like this massive list. And you literally have to check off boxes of would I accept a child that had this, not this. My husband and I felt very strongly, this is not a puppy, right? Like, you're not selectively choosing things. And we also felt like if we had children biologically, like you don't do that, right? This is your child, and whatever that child has is you manage it in whatever situation. So, there might have been maybe 2 things that we said that we did not feel equipped. And it was more about like how our home is set up. Like we have stairs. If you have a child that's in a wheelchair, like obviously like you're going to have to sell your home and find something that's a little bit more accommodating. So minus like 1 or 2 conditions, we were open to anything. When we got matched with our daughter, she was not known to have any special needs. We knew she was at risk for something, but until she could get stateside and get an MRI, that could not be confirmed. But the 3rd day we were in China, she had a seizure on us. And we very quickly realized that she did have, it's called Sturge-Weber syndrome. It's similar to epilepsy, but a little bit more complicated. Okay. And our son was with us on that trip. And at that time, he was undiagnosed type 1.
Okay. Can I ask an honest question?
Sure.
You're in China. That happens. Is there any part of you that's like, just back up and leave?
So I do not say this like flippantly at all. That experience there was 100% a trauma experience, like hands down. It was a trauma experience for us and for both kids. It was probably up until this point in my life, maybe one of the worst things that I've ever lived through was that experience. I remember when we went to the emergency room, we were with our translator. This is things we take for granted in the United States, like walking into an emergency room and being treated. And the first ER we walked in, they were like, we can't help you because she's a child and we only treat adults. So like, you need to leave. And so we like get back in the van and like drive to another emergency room that would see children. It's utter chaos. There's no order. There's no organization. And there was we had a CT scan. They literally Googled her syndrome, printed off the information and handed it to us and said through the translator, we've never treated a child that has this. You just need to go back to your hotel room. Like, we cannot help you. We don't know what to tell you. Wow. And we got back to our hotel room. This was, again, we'd been there for 4 days and we still had 10 days left in China before we could come home. It's a very regimented process. You don't just go at your own pace. And I remember sitting in the floor of the hotel room and she appeared as if she'd had a stroke. I mean, that's what had happened. Right. We later found out it's something called Todd's paralysis. It's like a temporary paralysis that can happen. But we didn't know that. Yeah. And I remember just this utter overwhelm of, we flew over here with like a healthy child and, we knew this was going to be tough, but all of a sudden, like, is she going to be permanently disabled? Like, is she going to recover? Like, we're here, we're stranded. It was, overwhelming would be an understatement, to say the least.
I know the intention is to adopt a baby, but your entire lead up to that is not expecting anything like this. It feels like it would be like if I took you into a hospital and just said, okay, that person's troubles are your troubles now.
Yeah,
like just boom,
because,
like that.
they say, in adoption, it's unique because, you know, biological parents, the bond is instant, right? Because that child was grown, in your womb, and when it's delivered, like that bond, it's instantaneous. And in adoption, it's okay to name that bond isn't instantaneous. And especially for our daughter, I remember we talked about this, and this was true for Shay as well, our oldest. Like, we had loved them from afar while we were waiting, but like when we got there and got her in her instance, like we were complete strangers to her.
Yeah.
So like she did not love us, she did not even know us. And so it's love is a choice in that moment, right? It's not a feeling, it's a decision that she is mine. And even if those like feelings aren't there, I mean, and also she was 3.5, that it's different than a newborn. Right. And so it's a very unique process.
So even though it's not instantaneous, you have to make the decision in that moment that this isn't a transactional thing that's happening here. Like
she's mine.
Yeah, this is my child. I love this child, and let's figure out what to do next.
Absolutely. I mean, you do go into 100% like mama bear mode in a moment. Mm-hmm. You're still overwhelmed, but it's also like, this is my child. So now we got to get to work. We got to figure out.
So even though you haven't given birth, you have that. It's so funny that you're on today. Last night I was in the house with Arden and a number of her friends. And in the course of some conversation, one of her friends was saying, I don't know, that they didn't think they were going to have kids or something. And I said, there has to be a switch somewhere on the way out when the baby comes by and like flips it. I was like, because you'll be surprised at what a different person you are after you're a mom. But you have the same exact experience.
Oh, without question. Now, of course, I can't, I don't have children biologically, but I would argue extensively that my feelings toward my children are 1000% the same. They are mine. That those maternal instincts, they are there just as present and known as if I had carried them. It's really amazing how that works. And now some of that grows, right? Because again, it's not I didn't have them for 9 months and carry them in that sense. And so, I
guess you're also lacking all the hormones too, that you would have during pregnancy.
Absolutely.
And birth, right.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I have 2 younger brothers that are biological to my parents. And I've never once felt like my mom treated me any differently than the other 2. Like I couldn't sense it. If she was doing it, she was hiding it really well. That's for sure.
I bet she wasn't.
Okay. So all of this happens.
Yes.
And I love making this podcast. I just realized while you were talking, I was like, this podcast, like in general, is like maybe the greatest thing I'm ever going to do. So at what point does Shay get type 1? Hey, did you know you may be eligible for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod Dash? That's a free 30 days of using an insulin pump. Actually, not just an insulin pump, a tubeless insulin pump. An insulin pump that you can wear in the shower, or while you're swimming, or while you're relaxing, running around, exercising, living, sleeping, everything. You never have to take it off. And because you don't have to take it off to shower, you can't forget to put it back on, which can happen when you're using a tubed pump. So that's pretty much it. You head to omnipod.com/juicebox to find out if you're eligible for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod Dash. Now, if you're thinking, yeah, Scott, I would, but I'm waiting for the next big thing from Omnipod, so, I don't want to get started with this, because then what if I can't switch or something? Well, that's not actually a problem, because with the Omnipod Promise, there is no need to wait for the next big thing. With the Omnipod Promise, you can upgrade to Omnipod's latest technologies for no additional cost as soon as they're available to you and covered by your insurance. Terms and conditions apply. And you can find out all the details again at omnipod.com/juicebox. And the promise is actually simple, a lot like the Omnipod, meaning there's no strings attached. You're just eligible for it. You don't have to sign up for it. You just get an Omnipod Dash now and If something new comes, just call them up and get the process started. I'm telling you right now, my daughter's been wearing an Omnipod since she was 4 years old. She is downstairs and she is 17. That is 13 years every day of wearing an Omnipod. It has been nothing but a friend to us in this journey with type 1. And I think you'll like it too. Omnipod.com/juicebox. So the Omnipod's a big part of why my daughter's A1C has been between 5.2 and 6.2 for the last 7 years. But another huge part is the Dexcom. And right now, Arden is wearing the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. I'm picking up my phone. I'm going to my app. I'm telling you Arden's blood sugar is 121. Arden actually had a big meal recently at a restaurant right after a pump change. So, had to be pretty aggressive for things not to get out of hand. But we've been using the data that's coming back from the Dexcom to stay on top of that blood sugar. No spikes, and we're not going to crash low as we bring her down. It's because we can see her blood sugar in real time right in front of us. Not just the number, but the speed and direction that it's moving. It's crazy, right? 121 and stable is a lot different than 121 and rising or 121 and falling. So we're able to make thoughtful boluses right now so we can get Arden's blood sugar back to the range we want it to be in before she goes to bed without causing a low. Dexcom gives you that information, the kind that you need if you're going to make decisions like that. Good decisions with insulin. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Get yourself a Dexcom G6 today. Did you know not only can I see Arden's blood sugar, but up to 10 followers could? I'm using an iPhone, but you could use an Android. Wouldn't matter. I could mix and match, actually. I could use an Android. My wife could use an iPhone. Arden could use it. It doesn't, you see what I'm saying? 10 followers. So up to 10 people can see her blood sugar in real time, right on their phone. And if Arden didn't have a phone, she could just use the Dexcom receiver. You don't have to have a phone to use the Dexcom. You do need to have a phone to be a follower. You understand. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Links in the show notes. Links at juiceboxpodcast.com. Support the sponsors, support the show. Oh, don't forget to take the survey at t1dexchange.org/juicebox. Back to Abby. At what age?
So we came home from China. That was September of 2018. Mm-hmm. So we get home and, if I'm honest, like life isn't awesome,
Right.
That's kind of common. She was medically complicated. We're very pro therapy in this household. And we have a counselor that we work with, and she has sort of laughed and said that we live the trauma trifecta, which is my husband comes from a kind of a childhood that had trauma. He is exposed to a job where every third day for 24 hours, he's in a trauma environment as a firefighter. And then we're raising children that come from a trauma environment. Yeah. And so, that isn't always fun. And so that first year we were home was really, really tough. And, again, for Shay, imagine like you get a sibling overnight that's 3.5, and she's getting a lot of attention because she's medically needy and complex. And we were, ambulance at the house, overnight stays in the hospital, MRIs, appointments, lots of, stuff. And she was getting a lot of attention. And so behavioral wise, like he struggled in that year we were home. We all were struggling to just sort of stay afloat. Mm. So in retrospect, I can look back and see some of his behavior issues I do think were related to the fact that his blood sugar was probably off the charts. And what I can now see in him, like when he's high, it's that like massive irritability and, like explosiveness. Sometimes I can see that. Yeah. And so I can look back in that lens and probably guess that some of that was his blood sugar, making it worse because we didn't know that was going on. But there was just some things that started to emerge that we started to put the pieces together that something else might be going on. And so Sophia came home in September of 2018, and he was diagnosed November 8th of 2019.
Wow. Was there just did you just go into a room for a half a second and be like, oh, come on?
Oh, no,
Yeah.
I can tell you where I was sitting.
Okay.
We came home from the hospital and I was sitting on the edge of the bathtub, just weeping
Yeah.
and feeling like, wow, like I am not equipped for this journey. You know what I mean? Like, and also, if I'm just very honest, like, again, from a faith perspective, like, really, God, like, what else have you got for me? Because this is a lot. I'm not sure I'm capable of walking this road. I mean, I really had that feeling.
Are you even 30 years old at that point? Right
Oh
in
gosh,
that-
I'm much older than you. I'm right now. I'm almost 42.
Oh, stop
So
it. Okay, so people can't see you. You look like you're 12. Never mind.
I'll take that. Thank you.
You're
No,
gonna have
I
to.
feel like trust me, since November 8th of 2019, I feel like I've aged significantly, but no,
So
I was, I guess, yeah, I was 40. I just turned 40 a month before when he was diagnosed.
it's telling because, people who are younger than that, who don't feel like they have things together, probably in the back of their head are like, oh, I have to have it together by the time I'm 40, right?
And I was already there. So
I share on the podcast pretty freely that I don't think I was even like the person I am right now as far as like thoughtful just over the last couple of years.
yeah.
Like I just feel like I'm a guy, but like as I get older and my testosterone dwindles a little bit, I can focus a little more on other stuff.
Yeah.
But it is like you don't know what it's like to be a man. It's like a mad tear to see boobs.
Yeah.
Like it's hard. Like it really gets a hold of you. So
yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I think that's one thing that made, again, when your family gets a type 1 diagnosis, and I do feel like, the family honestly gets the diagnosis because it has a ripple effect, as you know very well. And where, and this again is part of our story that we try to share openly and honestly, is like, yeah, it will take your marriage and test it to the limit as much as possible in terms of, we already felt like we were sort of fragile. We had just walked through a lot. And then when that diagnosis came on top of that, it really, I grieved and felt really sad. I let myself kind of sit in that sadness. And my husband's response to that feeling, instead of grief, it was rage. Right. He was just so angry that it had happened, angry.
Yeah.
100%. The only feeling that felt like he could sit with was like utter rage. He was just so mad.
Yeah.
And that was very hard for us to walk through together, of me feeling sad and him feeling ragey.
Right.
And like, you're
taking care of the kids too.
Right.
Yeah.
And like me wanting to just like, not, it's so interesting. Again, that mother instinct, I can almost take you back. There was like a moment, he'd probably been diagnosed for 2 weeks. And there was like this feeling that like rushed over me of, Abby, get it together. Like you are his mother and you can be sad, but you have got to fight like hell now. There's no other choice. Like you don't get to lay down and just give up or just feel like this is overwhelming or feel like, there was just this primal urge of like fight and do whatever you need to do to make this the best it can be.
Yeah.
But like I could take you to the moment of like I remember that feeling of okay, that's enough, and like now it's time to get to work.
Yeah, because the alternative is you just lay down and die. Right?
Yes, I mean you could just let it. So I've talked to other moms, that have been their children have been diagnosed since Shay, and just can empathize so deeply with that feeling of just wanting to like let it swallow you up, like the grief and the sadness and the overwhelm of like I cannot do this. But as a mother, it is simply not a choice that's afforded to us, right? You do not do that. It's your child, and you'll do whatever you need to do.
Right. It's for me, it was more of a leap. I think because I'm not a mom, honestly.
Yeah.
But I was a stay-at-home dad. there was this time where I felt like my wife, if she was with them right now, like if she was with them every day, she would know what to do. There'd be a more instinctual thing going on. And then that would mean they'd receive something that they probably need and deserve. And I have to stop acting like I'm just keeping them alive and throw myself into this feeling. And which is why now I feel like I'm probably just too ovary shy from being able to give birth myself. But I just realized, I guess, like if I'm not as emotional as I need to be, and I don't overcome all the demons of how I grew up and all of my problems, then I am just going to extensively throw everything that went wrong with me onto them and steal this experience they would have had with my wife if financially we could have done it the other way. Yeah. And so I was like, all right, well, I'll give over to it. But it's the hard part was that it felt like you were giving something else away. I don't even know what that thing was. The idea of what I thought my life was going to be or what I wanted it to be or something like that, right? But once I realized that they were the most important thing, then and I dedicated myself to it, then I didn't feel like I lost anything. Now I just feel like I have a different purpose and I'm doing a really good job at it. Yes. It's interesting, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, wow. See how much fun this was? We didn't even talk about diabetes yet. I get notes from people sometimes like, I learn a lot about the world from your podcast. It's not always like about diabetes. And I was like,
whole wide range of topics. You never know what you're going to hear.
So what are we just going to talk about boluses every time? That's no fun. Okay. So what was the diagnosis like? What made you notice that it was happening?
Again, my husband is a firefighter. He's also an EMT. And so he has, he's medically inclined. I'm not a clinician by background, but I have worked in healthcare for years and am like clinically, I guess, literate would be the best way to describe that.
Can I guess then you found out he had type 1 diabetes when your husband ran his head through the drywall?
Like, no, not quite.
You heard him yelling, going across the room. He's like, "God damn it!" And then boom, right? No, that wasn't
not quite. No. So there. Again, behavioral wise, we had seen some regression in Shay's behavior once Sophia came home, and we were trying to parse out like how much of this is adoption behavior, how much of this is developmentally, like he's just struggling because he has a new sibling. Like we were in this space of there's some stuff going on. He had a history of like occasional urinary tract infections. Mm-hmm. And so we started to see some regression around wetting the bed. Yeah. And this was a child that was like the easiest kid to potty train, like he just was simple. It was so easy. And then all of a sudden it became like this repeated thing. In full disclosure, I have a lot of mom guilt about this. Like I was irritated and angry with him at times because I was like, it felt in the moment like regression around attention seeking, right? I just am trying to do something like power stuff. I'm like, I know you're capable. You've been capable of this for like so many years. Like what's going on? So that was one thing, one part. And then that was coupled with he is, does so well at school and is a very like rule oriented kid, meaning he like loves his teacher, doesn't get in trouble. He's just that kind of kid. He always has been. And he got his card pulled in first grade for asking to go to the restroom when they had just gone to the restroom at lunch. Oh. And I was like, why did you need to go to the restroom? He was like, I'm thirsty a lot. And so, it was funny, but not funny, ironic, I guess. My husband and I, it's like, and maybe you've had people say this before. It's like if we just didn't say the word, then it just wouldn't come true. Mm-hmm. Both of us like telepathically are like, we need to make sure he doesn't have type 1. But to say out loud, let's go get him screened for diabetes. We just were like, yeah, let's just like make an appointment at the pediatrician and double check that he doesn't have a UTI, that there's not something like strange going on. Very under the radar, like it's going to be a non-issue. You
guys are both being super casual, knowing that you're wrong, right? Yeah, just like.
But I mean, honestly, I'm going to be.
I know what you mean.
Fully direct. This is part of me being naive in this. I was like, he's Asian, and the propensity of type 1 in the Asian population is a lot lower. So I was like, he's not going to have diabetes. He's he's native Taiwanese. Like the odds of a Taiwanese child having type 1 has to be even more tiny than like the average, population. And so in my mind, I had sort of already written it off of like, there's no way this could be it.
Yeah. You didn't do the other math where you're like, we flew all the way to China to do a lovely thing and the baby had medical issues immediately. Maybe we are the people this stuff happens to.
No, correct. Yes.
Right.
I had obviously not done the math of that yet. And so
can I stop for a second? It's super funny because I hope people are listening who have, natural children who have these problems and they feel like, oh, it's, like we're cursed or it's this stuff always happens to us. Like you randomly took people from other places and still had the same issue.
Yes, absolutely. And still, oddly enough, felt, I've read and listened to people talk about this weird feeling of like responsibility of like, oh, these were my genes. And like, did I quote unquote cause this, like that, what happens as a parent. I even had those same feelings. And again, genetically, I have no responsibility for either of my children. We do not obviously share any of the same genes. And I still had this weird feeling when he was diagnosed of like, I'm responsible for this, or like, what did I do here? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I understand.
Even though that made no logical sense, but that's how I just resonate with biological parents who have that feeling of, gosh, these were my genetics somehow that like set this up to happen.
So that's not even specific to people who are having genetic, like their own biological children. Wow.
Yeah.
I don't even know why I brought up what I said, other than I think there's a lesson in the words somewhere, but I haven't parsed it out yet. I don't know what it is, but that you can let go of that guilt now. If you have it, it's not, you didn't do anything.
Absolutely. So much.
There's so many people that I talk to through the podcast that it's become kind of obvious that a lot of people who say they have type 1 have sort of like Irish English backgrounds. And I know that's anecdotal, but sure. I mean, unless that's the only people who are listening to the podcast, but it seems I'm not marketing to just a pasty white crowd, so I don't think that's what's going on.
Yeah.
But think about that. Like, what if that's true? Like, forget it if it is or it isn't. Just make it true for a second for the sake of argument. You didn't choose where your ancestors were from. This has has nothing to do with you. And yet you'll spend time like beating yourself up over it. It's sad.
I think it's because our brain desperately wants to assign meaning to something when it's catastrophic, right? We just need meaning and we need a reason. And so like our brains will do anything to try to make this make sense when like it's never going to make sense.
Right.
You just have to accept it.
Yeah. You could almost pick anything and hang it on.
Sorry.
No. Good.
So we had these, symptoms, and this is how nonchalant we were sort of being about it. My husband was training for this very intense, it's called smoke divers training. He was going out of state for this. He'd been training for like 12 weeks, crazy intense. Like it's like the Navy SEALs of like firefighter training that he was like going to do. Mm-hmm. And he was leaving town the morning of the appointment. And so he was like, look, let me take him to his appointment. We'll do like a daddy son breakfast date at like a Waffle House. I'll take him to his appointment, then I'll take him back to school. And that way I can see him before I leave for the weekend. And so I'm always the one that like goes to the appointments and does all that. And I was like, you know what, you take him. That's fine. That's how naive I was that this is going to be like a non-issue.
Yeah.
And, he called me and they had done, a finger stick, and his glucose in the office was over 500. And he was like, you need to get in the car. Like you need to get here. And so, barely remember the drive to the pediatrician. It was about 15 minutes away. I was probably doing 100 miles an hour to get there, like threw stuff in a bag because I knew we were going to the emergency room because that,
Yeah.
And so we got there, went straight to the local children's hospital, and it was on a Friday morning when we got to the emergency room, and very thankful that we did apparently intervene soon. His A1C at diagnosis was only 8.4. Mm-hmm. So he did not have to go. He was not in DKA. We didn't even get admitted. We stayed in the emergency room for about 12 hours and then maybe not even that long. We were able to be discharged straight to the outpatient endocrinology office on campus. and get all of our education and stuff. And so from the appointment to the time we got home that night was probably about 15 hours.
Wow.
And then, so he didn't even have to stay.
No more
overnight.
peeing the bed then.
Yes, no. And then, so he always reminds me now of like, Mom, I told you I was doing the best I could, but like, you didn't believe me. And I'm like, I know. And that makes me a horrible mother because I did not believe you.
Listen,
but
I try to be really honest on this podcast. And if you think that you can't feel attacked by your children sometimes, it's a completely irrational thought, but they do something sometimes. And it's hard not to think, yo, you don't know me, but I used to be a person with dreams who wasn't in charge of someone's life. And I'm here doing this thing. Like you'll run through that thing in your head. Then you're like, oh, they didn't ask to be here. Like, this is all ridiculous. Like I'm thinking, And
I say that a lot is like, neither, and especially in our children's situations, like, this is not the life. Like they had no say in any of this, right? Like this is like, they are here in this world, in this life. And especially they didn't really have a choice in that.
Being adopted, it's twofold, really. Like you really did decide to get them. You didn't just be like, hey, let's see which one comes out. You were like, I'm going to go get somebody,
Yes.
It's intentional. Not that having sex to have a baby isn't intentional, but I don't know. There's something about that makes it feel like more so. Okay. So
and
go ahead.
It's interesting because, when we brought home Sophia, I didn't identify as like a special needs parent or like a child. I just, he was always like my healthy 95th percentile height, weight, I just didn't identify that. And then overnight, I was the parent of a child with a complex medical condition that was going for testing and needed medication and needed monitoring. And I didn't know anything about that world. And so it literally was a flipping of the switch with her. And what I'm grateful for is that I can clearly see how her joining our family was in some way equipping me for what was ahead. I just did not know that was coming, right? So I was already in a much different place thanks to her in terms of I know what I'm capable of. I know that I can manage something. So that I don't know when we got his diagnosis, yes, while obviously like overwhelmed and all of the things it's a natural feeling, I also felt strangely equipped because I already had a child that had complex medical needs that I had to manage.
Well, your expectations for yourself are different at that point too.
Yeah,
like you don't,
true.
It's not like I wonder if I can do this. It's like, well,
yes.
I guess I know I can,
I've proven it.
Yeah.
Yep. I know that I'm capable.
Doesn't mean you deserve more. For all the religious people listening right now, I'm not saying that Abby was like got a baby with type 1 because she was ready for it, because I understand the sentiment behind that. And I know when people say that to you, like, oh, if anybody could do it, you could. Like, that's a nice sentiment, but I mean, in real world, that's bull, like, so.
Agreed. I had a pastor one time that's used an expression that he says things say easy, but they live hard. And I feel like that's in that category, right? Like it's easy for someone to say that but like the lived experience of that is obviously a completely different story.
It also paints the picture that if I'm a screw up, then nothing bad will happen to me, which is a weird, like tell people like, look, just don't be ready for anything and nothing bad will happen to you. It'll be amazing. Yeah. I do want to, before we move on, reach back to something you said so long ago already that I let get past, is that your life just worked up until then. You had something, you wanted to do it, you did it, it happened. Yep. And I think that is so common for people. Like, I mean, I can be honest, I guess you grow up one of two ways. Like I could tell you that nothing in my life happened easily, but I grew up that way. But for somebody who did, like I watch my kids, like my son's athletic, he's handsome, he's strong, he goes to do something, he does it, he decides when he's 21, I might want to try to pitch, and goes out and like throws a ball 91.5 miles an hour the first time. He's like, oh, maybe I could just get drafted and do this. I was like, like that stuff. And then out of nowhere, he got Hashimoto's. And I watched it like crush him. Not for long. He pulled himself together, but it crushed him because, and I kept thinking, nothing's ever really gone wrong.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't have any perspective for something not working out the way he wants it to.
Yes.
And I keep wondering if maybe when he's older, hopefully I can try to stay alive long enough. Like I wonder if he'll look back and think, like, thankfully something happened that gave me some better perspective. Because when stuff goes too well for you, you really don't have any real world perspective at all.
Yeah. Grit is not developed, right? In that sense, whenever it's only easy. And not that you want to sign up for like tough experiences in life. But I think, again, that's why on this side of it, I can say I'm grateful that it happened the way that it did for us, because I would not be the person. I mean, I know that's sort of cheesy and people use that expression in different ways, but like, honestly, I wouldn't be the person that I am if that had not happened. And it shifted me and shaped me in a way that like it changed me for the better, even though it was not something that I would have willingly like signed up to experience.
No, I understand that sentiment. I completely agree. Okay. So you're home from the hospital.
Yes.
It's only a few years ago. Do you start with, like, what gear do they give you to start out?
So we started out on, are you asking like, what did we come home from the hospital with?
Yeah. Insulin, needles.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
What did they give you?
We came home, on Novolog, obviously injections, and on, oh my goodness, I just went blank on his long acting insulin. No, the other one.
Traceba,
thank you. My brain, it's been so long since I've had to think of it because he's on a pump now. And so like I haven't hit, so we came home on Traceba and Novolog, and that first weekend, was horrible. Like a lot of parents, like, he cried, and, he also was a constant snacker, and he loved second portions of everything. And, for him to realize that this can't be, that world is over, at least for now, and we have to figure out how to do this. That weekend was horrible, for him, and just watching him grieve the loss of what he knew prior. I always have deep empathy for kids that are diagnosed even in their like teen years, because it's like, you clearly know what life was like before this. And even for him at 7, he knew what life was like prior to this. And so we were on that combination, from diagnosis in November. And because of the podcast, and because I'm an avid reader, and I like will devour content if given the opportunity, I always laugh and say, I just proceeded to get myself a master's degree in all things like diabetes related, and studied and proved to our endo that we were not a typical family, in the sense that we could handle the data of having a Dexcom. It was not going to overwhelm me. We had that whole conversation of, if we put you on one too early, it's going to overwhelm you because there's so much data to look at. And I just made the argument that the lack of that data was giving me anxiety. Like I wanted to know. Honestly, he got the Dexcom the week before Thanksgiving. So again, we got it pretty quick. That was the first time I felt like I could breathe, was just when we got that. I felt like, okay, I feel like I can breathe just a little bit in terms of sleeping, which still doesn't, isn't super great, but it was better then. And then started to advocate pretty heavily that we wanted a pump, but we wanted to make sure that we were letting Shay drive that conversation and not us. And I actually think it was maybe one of our diabetes education classes where one of the nurses had said, like, parents push often for a pump very quickly, but just be mindful, it isn't on your body. And so like, you do need to make sure it's what your child wants and that you're not the one trying to push for that. And so I did try to take that to heart and make sure we were giving him voice in that. And we actually went to a regional type 1 event in January of that year. And he was in like a kids class that day while the parents were in sessions. And it was a JDRF event. And we got in the car that day to come home, and he was like, Mom, they all had pumps. I want a pump. Like, that was his first visual exposure to other kids that had it. And he was like, yeah, that's what I want.
Yeah. No one had a pocket full of needles like me.
So once he was able to verbalize, like, yes, I know I want that, then I started full force, like, we're doing this like as fast as possible. And so he transitioned to a pump in March of 2020. Literally, he was on spring break, and never went back to school, of course, because of COVID.
Right.
And so went on the Omnipod, and yeah, we've been on that ever since.
Wow. I think when Omnipod 5 happens, your overnights might get a little better too.
Oh, I was reading an article just this week to my husband, and we were just like, whew, life is going to be awesome.
It's so
very
close.
soon.
Had COVID not happened, I think it would be out already.
Yeah.
So
we were willing. He's been very vocal. Again, he loves his Omnipod. Even like we let him, of course, he came home with, a couple different options and tried them. But for him, because of the fact that it's tubeless, I mean, he was like, there is no other option for me. He was adamant that that's what he wanted. And it's been wonderful for him. Excellent. And life-giving in so many ways.
How did you find the podcast?
So I have, I grew up in a small town, and the neighboring county, like we were a very small town as well. And, we all, everybody close by you and that sort of thing. And so there was another mom that she went to a local high school that was like in the county over from mine. And we've always known each other, and her daughter has type 1. And I believe the Facebook post I made of when we came home the next day, and it was a picture of him in the ER and asking, letting everybody know what was going on. I could go back and look. I actually think she commented in that thread, tagged you or the podcast one. You commented back.
Oh, did I?
And yes.
I wish I remembered.
And yeah, so that's, it was the weekend we were diagnosed. And
kidding. We found it right away. And then
I found it very
quickly.
Like
listening and
yes, I remember binging multiple. This was pre-pro tips. Like that wasn't a thing really. I mean, like you hadn't organized it in that sense. And so I just remember like binging. I think in that Facebook post, I asked, where should I start? And you gave me some suggestions in that thread of like, here's a few episodes to get you started. And so thankfully I didn't go too long at all before I found you as a resource.
That's cool. It's hard for me to remember the podcast the way I intended it in the beginning, because it was so like loosely, like I'm like, let me just get started, and like I'll tell the story and we'll see where it leads to. It's fascinating. Like I'm really, really touched by the fact that it could be valuable to anybody. And a really neat story. I've used it so often. I mean, even in my current full-time job, I work remotely. That was pre-COVID. It's a virtual organization for the most part. And, a person on a different team than mine, her daughter was diagnosed just a few months ago. And even just this past week, she had DM'd me in Slack and said, my daughter, we're struggling. She's still on MDI. She's sneaking food. I don't know what I'm going to do. And immediately I was able to go and like, you had an episode on that. And I was like, I DM'd it to her and said, like, have you listened to this one? She was like, I haven't. So thank you. So it's just always nice. I feel like when somebody has a question, there's usually always an episode that matches. I'm starting to feel good that that's true, because I'm starting to find myself seeing people's questions and be like, oh, I can just answer with an episode. Like that's really cool. Like, and that's what you get out of longevity too, is being around for a while. I'm thrilled that I didn't ask you, but it has been helpful for you.
Oh no, it's been immensely helpful
good.
In so many ways. It gave me language that I didn't know that I needed. I really do feel like it helped me advocate in a different way. I felt more confident in my ability to advocate even for a pump. I just felt like I had the language to just know what I wanted to say. The whole thing about, I know it's a tagline now, but like being bold with insulin, I'm so thankful that I listened to that early on, so that feeling of being afraid of giving too much, like that just never, I didn't sit in that space, because I had listened to that episode so early on, maybe in the first week we were diagnosed, that didn't have time to take root where I had that fear. And so I don't know, it's just always, it started me off on a foundation that I felt like made, it made our transition to this world a lot less lonely, for sure.
That's excellent. I have to say that the idea of, I know I've seen people like, people who are like, maybe like more low carb, they'll be like, that's the bold with insulin guy. And I want them to know, like, I didn't come up with that. Like, I know it's the title of the episode, but if you listen enough, you realize that while I'm editing, I just go, oh, those are words that sound like a title. And then I put them on. I don't really think too deeply.
Sure.
It was maybe 2 years after that episode came out that I started seeing people use the phrase on social media. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, that has to be me, because I've never heard anyone say that before. So much so that I was like, I think that's an episode title. Like, I wasn't really even certain, you know? Yeah. And then I went back and it was, and I started asking people questions like, yeah, there's that episode that teaches you to be bold with insulin. I was like, oh, is that what it does? Like that wasn't like, I was just telling a story that day. You know, I think that was just, that's a one-on-one episode. I'm just talking into the microphone.
Yeah.
And I think back and I'm like, I wonder what would have happened if I picked 3 different words out.
that would have been it.
Would that have been it? You know, would you have been running around saying a different thing? Or it's kind of weird that that's the case. And I just spoke with, I've spoken recently with 2 different hospitals, and I should knock on some wood because I really want to do this, but I think I might be invited to teach their staff how to talk to people about diabetes.
Oh, that would be huge.
And that is just comes from having all these conversations with people.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
And you guys are all like, sort of like, my knowledge is now an amalgam of all of your experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's weird. I feel like I'm, I don't know. Like, I feel like I'm like Siri. No, you know what I mean?
It's a good analogy.
Yeah.
I like that.
But it's and I love like getting better and better. I got a thank you from a little kid today, like a little voice note that was like, it just was like this little 6-year-old kid. And he's like, thanks for teaching my mom all this stuff. And I sent it to Jenny and I said, I'm better at this because of you. Oh. And so I think it's just starting to be that thing where it's just, we're feeding ourselves and each other, and it's very, very cool. So I get a little misty when I talk about it, and usually people aren't looking at me while I'm recording, so it's easier to get away with. But yeah, your story is messed up.
I always say, like, when we go places, like we just went to family camp for our 2nd year in a row. And I was like meeting with the counselors that were going to be working with him. And I'm like, look, our family, we're a lot. We're very complicated. So just buckle up. Let me explain all.
Something's going on.
We got a lot going on.
Has anything helped you and your husband? Like, you were sad, he was mad. Are you guys in those places still? And if not, what do you think helped?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, a lot of therapy, honestly, a lot of support. I mean, really, honestly, therapy has helped immensely. Actually talking about, I mean, we were pro therapy before this, but I think like specifically being able to process that and how each one of us were feeling very different and having very different reactions to that. And especially for him, helping him come to terms with, like what caused that in him. And it was like the lack of control. And as a weird, and maybe you can relate to this as a dad, also this, like, we talked about like mom instincts, but this like primal feeling as a dad that my job is to protect, and feeling like for whatever weird reason I didn't in this, even though that's illogical, right? Like that's not possible, but him feeling like this has happened. And like, again, I didn't do my job as a dad. Like, I feel like I messed up somehow, and which was not obviously a healthy response, which he had to unpack and figure out. But I think it was, I read something not too long ago, and she used the analogy of scaffolding on a cathedral, and how, you know, scaffolding is so ugly. And it takes a building that's, you know, beautiful otherwise, and like it just makes it look so ugly, but it's necessary to restore and maintain something that's precious. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think I've said we have lived these last few years with a lot of scaffolding up.
Yeah.
It's been ugly, but it's also been very necessary to preserve what's precious, you know, underneath all that. And so we are slowly, like, those pieces of scaffolding are being like removed, but it's been an ugly process. You know, it's not been always nice and neat, but it's worth it. It's just, it takes time, right? Yeah. Healing around that sort of stuff just is a long process, but it's a much better place than where we were. It's just, it took a lot to get us where we are.
I have 2 episodes coming up soon that'll be out for months by the time yours goes up. There were 2 different therapists, and they're both about relationships and around type 1 because it's so difficult. And I relate to what you're saying because I am inherently inside of me. I want to fix problems.
Yes,
and
same for him.
And just not just big ideas. Like if you were to come to me and tell me about your day and it sounded like something inside of it wasn't going right, there was a time in my life where I wouldn't have even been able to hear your story. I would have already been constructing a way to fix the problem that you described. Yep. I wasn't even listening to the people who were talking to me. I was like, how do I fix this for them?
Yes.
And it's obvious. Like if you listen, it's obvious. I'm adopted for one, right? My parents, even my adopted parents, are divorced. And when my mom and dad broke up, I became kind of the de facto parent of my brothers. Like I've been fixing people's problems since I was little.
Yeah.
You know, and now I get into a situation where every problem doesn't need to be fixed. And I can't stop myself. Like I'm a fireman who sees a fire everywhere, even if there's no fire.
That was exactly.
Yeah, right. I'm
and
running
I think,
forward.
That was like he was used to being that guy, right? Like I'm on scene, I'm in control. Like we're gonna get this figured out, and then it like struck really close to home of just being reminded, like I am not in control. I think the fragility of life gets very thrown in your face, right? In an instant of like, okay, there are some things that this is real. Like I can't prevent things from, they're going to deal with hardships that I cannot take away from them. Yeah. And so how am I going to sit with that uncomfortable feeling, when it's something I can't fix?
You also get a false sense that you're actually fixing something. Like even in the fireman analogy, you put the fire out, you leave, and you're like, we did it. Except they still don't have a place to live. Their cat's dead. They don't have clothing. They lost all their, like you didn't really fix the whole thing. You put the fire out, right? And so even when your kids are asking you stuff and you're like, well, I don't know, XYZ, do this, that fixes that problem. I still wasn't listening to all of the other emotional entanglements that were going on. I was like, I see a tangible problem in front of me. I know how to fix it, which is why you'll hear me like joke and not joke on the podcast. And I say like, if the zombies come, you come find me because I'm going to be alive at the end. Right. But it doesn't mean I'm going to be alive and happy. I'm just going to be alive. Right. I'll be, it's not like I'm going to be able to build a utopia somewhere. I'm just not going to let the monster get me.
Yes.
Like it's kind of how I feel.
That makes sense.
Anyway, I imagine your husband probably had similar feelings. It's cool that he did that. Did you have to cajole him or did he go willingly?
In what way?
To therapy.
Oh, no. I think because we had such a foundation of like being a pro therapy family because we needed to be even before, even before Shay came home, we've always been a family. When your kiddos are adopted, if you're wise, you don't wait for problems to emerge. Like you try to be in front of a lot of that. And so a lot of what we've done was what I would call proactive therapy. We were kind of trying to get in front of things, have good conversations about stuff. But this, no, he didn't fight it because he also knew that the end result of if we didn't process it or like, walk that path to healing was not going to end well. Right. Like he knew. So he went, it took us a little bit to find the right person. We struggled a little bit with that, but it's been one of the healthiest things. And I think honestly should be required for like every newly diagnosed family. I think you should get, a Dexcom and a therapist.
I just said this somewhere else, but I'll put it here too. COVID did one good thing. If it did anything, is mental health has gone online in a big way and made it much more accessible for people.
Agreed.
So I think that's great. Dude, you were amazing. Seriously. I didn't know you were going to be this great. We really struggled to get you. So what happened? Did I move you first because of my trip?
No. Yes. So I think, we had booked it and then you emailed and needed to move it. And I think I must have not moved it on my calendar. I left the original appointment. So I thought it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And then when the reminder came out from Squarespace, it was like, it's today. And I was like, I'm like, I have a team meeting at that time slot that was like, we had a training that was like non-negotiable. I had to attend. So I was like, I'm not going to be able to do it. And so, yeah, I'm glad that
it worked out. I can tell you that I can tell what you do for a living because you were so good at laying this out. Like,
yay.
I have never I don't think I've spoken this little in a long time. I was like,
I'm a talker too. So I'm from the South. I talk a lot.
No, but had you gone in a way that I would have been like, oh, this is blowing the flow of this, I would have like redirected you.
Okay, good.
But I was like, wow, she's doing so good. Like there was a moment where I was like, I wonder if I could leave.
Do I need to be here?
Yeah, I was like, she's doing such a good job. I could probably like go make a sandwich or something and come back and just be like,
oh gosh. Well, really I hope that was a compliment. I hope it wasn't that I was taught.
No, it was an absolute compliment. Listen, you guys hear every episode that I record. I think of only maybe destroyed 2 or 3 of them for reasons that the people that recorded asked, sure. And they've always been reasonable. I've always thought at the same time, you know what, you're right. Let's be done with this one. But there are some people who are more natural at getting their story out. There's some people who feel the flow of it. There's some people who have it planned out in their head and that stifles them. And there's some people that have it planned out in their head and that helps them.
Yeah.
I think about like little Sophia from Russia. I don't know if you heard hers, right?
Yes.
At one point I tried to move on and she was sort of like, we're not done here yet. And I was like,
we need to go through this part.
It's like, all right, geez, but but everybody's different, but everyone's great in their own way.
Yeah.
Just you clearly talk to people and explain things to them. Like
that's
in your professional life. Yeah. So you're really good at this.
Absolutely. So, thank you. I really am grateful for, I mean, I know people say that to you and I know you probably, I don't think you don't probably get tired of hearing it, but honestly, like you were a lifeboat to our family when we like desperately needed it. So now I'm going to cry. Okay.
Thank you for saying that.
Thank you very much.
Very kind of you.
I really appreciate, people don't understand this world and you feel so lonely when you're first diagnosed. And there was something so comforting about like, I just didn't feel alone because I could listen, you know what I mean? And it also, I'm an action person. I just felt like there was this, like, again, when that primal instinct of like, get to work, I felt like it gave me something tangible to do. Like I can do, I can consume his content and I can do something with it. And I felt like it gave me empowerment of like, I don't have to just sit here and wallow and feel like shit because this is bad. Yeah. Like I can do something about this. And so, the actionable part of it, I've always appreciated.
No, that's cool because that's one of the things I did on purpose. So is the idea of boiling the concepts down that they were so small and understandable that you could actually be like, I think I could try this.
Yes.
Exactly. Instead of just feeling, because you have to give over to the idea that everyone newly diagnosed, or even if you're struggling, you're overwhelmed. If you knew what to do, you'd be doing it.
Of course.
Right? It's not happening. If you're a parent, you've got the anxiety and the stress. If you're an adult with type 1 or otherwise, your blood sugars are bouncing all over the place. It's difficult to think. And now people come in with these overly complicated technical explanations with a bunch of words you don't understand. And after they're done, you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
What am I supposed to do with that?
Right. So I thought, why don't I just explain to people what's in my head?
Yeah.
Which is just, like I've said before, like I don't have the ability to break that stuff down either. That's why I made the podcast because that's why the podcast exists because I didn't want to count carbs. That's one reason, I needed a different way to do it. I've come to realize now over time in my heart, it's a time capsule for Arden a little bit.
Yes.
Like, I want her to be able to like understand diabetes. Like even if like she wakes up when she's 30 and she's like, let me figure out what this guy was talking about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it'll all be there for
her. I love that.
Yeah. And it teaches me, like while I go, I have a lot of ideas while I'm talking to people or moments, like even like when the podcast is kind of like delved into like talking to therapists or like that kind of thing. It's all really important. And we say it's important, but then no one talks about it.
Yeah.
And I think that self-help, which it ends up being, is far less about directions and more about like a visceral understanding.
Yes. The shared experience. Yeah.
You can't just give people bullet points and expect them to fix their life with it.
It's so true.
Right.
I also think there's something, again, this is my world, is there is something like deeply sacred about holding someone's story. And like, that's what you do, is like you people come on here and like you are the holder of that space. And like that is, there is something in that that's really, really special and unique. It matters, you know, people being able to tell their story in that sense, and having somebody hold space for that. Like, it is important.
Yes.
It really is.
Someone has to do that. And it can't just be anyone. And I don't mean this as a pat on my back, but like, it has to be somebody who holds your attention, whose voice makes you feel comfortable, whose cadence makes you feel like I remember watching Dave Chappelle receive like the Kennedy Center honors. And he said that when he was growing up, his mom, I don't know all the details, so I'm going to sound like an idiot for a second, but there was this older idea of that there's a storyteller in the tribe, and that she saw him that way. And I was like, oh, that's super interesting. And and I don't see this as any different than that.
Yes.
Right. So
agreed.
It's very specific. It's very niche. It's diabetes.
Yeah.
Almost more specifically type 1. Although I do think a lot of the management stuff we talk about, even the ideas, if not the insulin, fits with type 2 pretty well.
Has application.
Yeah. But I think what you said is really like insightful, and I appreciate it, because it's so easy to look at this and be like, oh, it's a podcast. But it's everybody from all over the world getting to add into the story of what it's like to live with type 1 in a place where it's actually consumable. Not like, oh, I ran into an article once, but then I didn't see the next one about the next person. This is the hub. It happens here. Yeah. And so that is magical. Yes. And it's perpetuated. It's perpetuated by the people who listen, because you don't grow a podcast on purpose. You don't buy ads and talk people into listening to it. It literally has to be your friend telling you and you doing this, and people. It has to be organic. If it's not, it just doesn't work. Well, first, let's thank Abby for coming on the show and telling us that amazing story. Thank you, Abby. I want to remind you that it's Diabetes Awareness Month in November and National Adoption Awareness Month. Thanks so much to Dexcom, makers of the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor, for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. And thanks again to Omnipod. Head over to their website and find out about that Omnipod Dash. See if you're eligible for the free 30-day trial. That's at omnipod.com/juicebox. And of course, the Dexcom address is dexcom.com/juicebox. There are links to these and all of the sponsors in the show notes of your podcast player. Head at juiceboxpodcast.com. Couple of little things at the end here. First of all, thank you very much for listening to the show and for supporting the Juicebox Podcast by sharing it with other people. I really appreciate that. What else? T1dexchange.org/juicebox. U.S. resident, has type 1 diabetes. U.S. resident is the caregiver of someone with type 1. In less than 10 minutes, you can fill out a survey that will help other people with type 1 diabetes, and it'll help the podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, you should check out the Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. It's a private group, so you can go in there and really talk about type 1. There are over 17,000 members in that group who understand life with type 1 diabetes. The group is absolutely free. You should go check it out.